So as the U.S. increasingly looks inward and embraces some protectionist policies, where will that leave Canada? Kirsten Hillman is the Canadian ambassador to the United States, and she joins us now. Ambassador, thanks for joining us. You were at the speech last night. How did you interpret this latest Buy American language from President Biden?
Yeah, hi, and thanks for having me. So just to clarify, what the president was referring to is the implementation of the guidelines that are going to govern the Buy America policies that were adopted by Congress in the infrastructure legislation a little over a year ago. So the U.S. is in the process of taking that legislation and determining what it means in specific sectors. That's what he was talking about. So although he said it was a new Buy America policy, it is actually the implementation of something that has been the Biden policy for a little while, just as a matter of fact. I think that, here's the reality. As those who saw that clip will have seen, Buy American policies are very, very popular in the United States. It was one of the few moments where every single member of the House was on their feet cheering, and they have been the Biden policy since he was elected, and they've been the policy of previous Republican and Democratic governments. And the idea behind them is that ensuring that government contracts are filled by using products that are made by U.S. workers in the United States will create jobs in the United States. That is a policy that has a lot of resonance here in the U.S. But what we have succeeded in doing over a generation, when these policies come up, we have succeeded in explaining to the Americans by getting quite granular with them that the premise of the policy doesn't really apply when you apply it to Canadian-U.S. trade. And the reason for that is because we largely trade in inputs. Most of what we sell to the U.S., most of what they sell to us are intermediary products that are used in the construction of other products. And if you break those supply chains down, what happens is not job creation in the U.S., but actually disruption of efficient systems and job loss. And so we've been quite successful over the years in getting exemptions, in having our trade agreements apply to these rules, in having some sort of sectoral, arrangements or specific contractual arrangements, and that's what we're busy trying to do now and have been for many months.
Right. That's why with electric vehicles, for instance, we saw Buy American sort of morph into Buy North American, and that became the argument there. But we were both in Mexico City not that long ago when the U.S. president was talking about continental cooperation on critical minerals and semiconductors. And we keep coming back to this language. And I know it's very popular on both sides of the aisle in both parties in the United States to say this sort of thing. But how do you react to the fact that when you think we've moved past the big fight, it comes back? And I wonder if it foreshadows what we could be facing when we try to move on the critical mineral strategy with the U.S. over time.
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing to say is that we have to be vigilant. Canada has had to be vigilant for over 20 years with respect to these policies. I don't see that ending anytime soon, given the popularity, as you say, of these policies. And being vigilant means bringing the real facts to the table, explaining that the policy objective will not be met if those policies are applied to Canada, and therefore finding ways around them to the benefit of Canada, Canadians, and of course to Americans, right? We have to show that those policies aren't good for them when they apply them to us. So we will just, I believe, have to continue that. There won't be one moment where these policies just sort of disappear for us. I don't foresee that anytime soon, given the high level of popularity that they have. And I also think that there is public speeches around what folks are trying to do, which is encourage job creation in their own country, which the president is deeply committed to, and as he should be, just as our government should be deeply committed to job creation within Canada, and reconciling that with the parallel objective, as you say, of working closely with our closest allies and partners and building resilience and making sure that the lessons of COVID and the lessons of the disruptions in supply chains that have come from the Russian invasion of Ukraine are all learned. And it seems like those are very much in tension, right? And they are to a certain extent at the highest level. But what I think is possible and what we have to really work on is trying to implement these policies that our governments have in a way that will achieve the job creation goal but not break down the supply chains. And for just to come back to the exact same point I've made already a couple of times, because breaking down the supply chains undermines the job creation.
But you say you have to argue those facts. But I mean, Joe Biden knows these facts. I mean, he's not a rookie. I mean, he's a first-term president, but he's been at this a long time.
Right.
You know, and his White House, the administration is aware of the integration of these supply chains. They must understand this by now, especially with the NAFTA negotiations and renegotiations we went through under President Trump, and with the conversations now about the critical mineral strategy. So, I mean, how do you counter that when clearly they must know the full implications of the policy that they're celebrating in the State of the Union last night?
Sure. Well, I think you can have a policy that is your overarching policy, and then you can have the application of that policy, you know, that it may be more nuanced, if I can put it that way.
Okay.
I mean, that's certainly what we will work for. We will work. You know, there's no point in fighting against a policy at its broadest possible level like this, because it is deeply popular, and it's understandable that it's deeply popular because the president is I mean, we have to be clear-eyed about this. The president is deeply committed to creating jobs in the United States by increasing manufacturing in the United States. And that's, you know, and there it is. And there's nothing, that's a good thing. If I was one of his voters, I would want him to do that, just as we want our leaders to create jobs in Canada. The question is, how do we do that in a way that is mutually supportive, right? Where we're both better off, rather than sort of ripping apart systems that are working really, really well to our mutual advantage.
So what's the exposure here to Canadian companies? I mean, I know this is nowhere near the size of what NAFTA would have been, or even like the electric vehicle credits, what that would have done potentially to the auto sector. But how exposed is Canada? How much does it stand to potentially lose on government infrastructure projects, on bridges, if President Biden does implement what he said last night?
Right. So there we're going to the analysis is sort of ongoing. Traditionally, Buy American, as I said, there are some of the policies that apply to us. Some of them don't because of free trade agreements that we have, and there are new sectors or new components in the construction sector that have been added to some of his legislation through this legislation, and we're kind of assessing that, and what matters is often really very, very detailed, right? It's not like all product X, copper, lumber, whatever, pick a product is excluded. It's like threshold amounts. So it's a fairly complicated analysis, sector by sector, project by project, and that's where we have to work with Canadian industry to make sure we really understand this, and they can give us a good understanding of how they work with the U.S. in the context of these kinds of policies, so that we can seek a conversation with the U.S. that is based on the facts of how our companies interact.
Okay. Ambassador Hillman, thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Good to talk to you.
And that's Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman.